open. Mr. Wijaya, welcome and welcome the guests you brought with you. You are appearing here before a committee appointed by the Doctoral Board of Erasmus University to defend your Before we start the discussion, I invite you to give a short introduction in which you tell us about the subject, findings that have only have the floor.
Thank you very much, Sir Rector. Good morning and welcome, everyone. Let me start with this one quote from one of my respondents when I was collecting the data in Indonesia. Let's call him Mr. X, and I will try to recreate his expression at the time when he shared this sentence. The way our pastors enrich themselves, their family, and their entourage is simply inappropriate. Look at their expensive cars and excessive appearance. This is certainly against what God has taught us about modesty. The extravagant lifestyle and financial obscurity are actually a financial crime. I will position myself as someone who demurs at these immoral practices loudly. My heart is broken and angry witnessing all these. So from this quote, this is just a clear example of how values and emotions are important. They are important not only for individuals, for this particular Mr. X, but also for organizations and society at large. Look at what happened to Brexit, for instance. However, I just want to say this, that the way we think about human beings behave, the way we make decisions, we rely not only on our rationality, but we also rely on our emotions, on our values. The sad thing is, according to me, of course, is that we tend to over-worship our rationality at the expense of our values and our emotions. So the goal of my dissertation is really to start exploring this topic of some of the deeply rooted human elements of values and emotions through the eyes and lens of Pentecostal churches in Indonesia, my home country. So what is Pentecostalism? Pentecostalism is one of the many denominations under Protestantism. So it is a Christian religion. So the main characteristics of Pentecostalism is that they believe in the manifestation of the Holy Spirit, such as miraculous healing and speaking in tongue. This is the map of Indonesia, one of the largest countries in the world by people, by population, and also by area. As a researcher, this geographical vastness and cultural richness pose a little bit of a sampling problem initially. So as a researcher, of course, it is, I cannot just close my eyes and pick in the map which islands or cities to focus on because there are thousands of them. So I did my homework here in the Netherlands for 4 full months. I consulted a great deal of literature. I talked to a lot of people here in the Netherlands and also back in Indonesia, calling them, Skype with them. I went to a few Pentecostal churches in the country, and I also watched some videos and documentaries about anything Pentecostal. Pentecostal movement, global Pentecostalism, Indonesian Pentecostal churches, how, for instance, in Indonesia, Pentecostal churches have their interactions and also perhaps collisions with other religions such as Islam. So I read all of that, and I got the answer to the which island question, and it was clear for me after doing my desk research that it should be the Java island. And there are two reasons actually for this. The first one is because Pentecostalism originated on this island, so there is abundance of data. Reason number two was because the Pentecostal churches are very the most sophisticated Pentecostal churches are to be found on this island, on Java Island, in terms of their strategy, their internal processes, their governing structure, and also size. In fact, the biggest church in Indonesia is a Pentecostal church, and it happened to be in my sample. However, I said to myself, there is a limitation to doing this desk research back in Holland, here in this country, because I couldn't find which cities, because again, there are still hundreds of cities on Java. So what I did was, I said to myself, I have to be in the field myself, experiencing things myself, and make decisions. And that's what I did in March 2013. I went back to my home country for 7 months to conduct my ethnography. So what is ethnography? Ethnography, traditionally, academically, it is a qualitative data collection method where we rely on participation and also observation. So yes, I observe and I sometimes participated in some of these church activities. So yes, sometimes I went to services where they perform exorcism. Sometimes I went to hospitals where I saw how people offer prayers to the sick, how they knock on doors introducing Jesus Christ to the non-believers, and also joining some fellowship events like this, having dinners, going to the movies together, bonding with these people. So fast forward, I spent 32 days. In the first 32 days, I found the answers to my which cities question. So I picked these 3 cities from east to west: Surabaya, Solo, and Bandung. And again, there are 2 big reasons why I picked these cities. The first one was because of organizational access and organizational uniqueness. Of course, these organizations needs to be important. They needs to be somewhat looked upon in the country. And of course, because of the access, I need to be able to gain access, because without access, it means I have no data. And the second reason is because of the Islamic culture. Of course, growing up in Indonesia, I realized that my home country is the largest Muslim country in the world. But what I did not realize was that Muslim people have different interpretations of the Quran. They said that, oh yeah, Quran has different layers, and we also have different interpretations, the way we interpret it. So these differences actually are also manifest in the way these churches behave on a daily basis. So because of these differences, I want to understand how they actually operate in the field. So that's the reason why I picked these 3 cities. So I spent additional 180 days in the field. So in total, I spent 212 days. And I learned one critical thing during my field study, that ethnography is not only about being methodical, but being systematic. Of course, I read all the books. This is, by the way, the first time I did my ethnography. So I read a lot of manuals, a lot of articles about how to do ethnography. And a lot of articles mention that, it is actually about building relationship, but only in the 3rd month I realized that it is actually that important, and I learned how to do it along the way. Because without trust, people, especially when you want to study something that's so deeply rooted, such as their values and their emotions, it is not easy when you don't gain their trust, or when there is no comfort from these people in talking about these topics. So long story short, I managed to gain access to 11 churches. 6 of them are mega churches with more than 2,000 people, and 2 were medium with members between 200 and 500 people. So this is the summary of all the data that I collected in the field. So of course, I not only relied on my own observation and participation of these activities, but I also want to get the perspective from the other parties. So I conducted interviews, informal talks, and I took videos, photos, and collected lots of secondary data. So now the question is, with all this data, and I have analyzed it, I have 2 papers coming out and empirical papers in the book, as you can see. What are actually the findings and what would be the implications for organizations in general? So I have several findings here that I would like to share with you. The first one, values give people the willingness to enact what they believe is right. So let's take Mr. X from the beginning as an example here. Mr. X believes in the value of transparency. He didn't see that in the church where he worked for, and that's the reason why he feels like he had the willingness to see that the organizational practices change. So when we think about values, this transparency, it's something abstract. But we need to pull this down to make it tangible. So in this case, for instance, Mr. X said to me, I would love to see our church have a financial auditing system. So financial auditing is something tangible. But to make something to convert something abstract to something tangible, we need what we call the emotional energy. The emotional energy is the power to convert these 2 different things. So the abstract values and the tangible stuff like what you can see as organizational practices or structure. Number 2, values are relatively constant while emotional energy is elastic. It is relatively constant because it will be highly unlikely for Mr. X, for instance, to say today that, hey, I believe in transparency, but a month from now or a year from now, oh, I believe in financial obscurity, for instance. So, so values are pretty much constant, but what we can manipulate, what we can change is actually emotional energy. Emotional energy can expand or contract. So this is the case where I saw in Bandung, in that city, where they, so Pentecostal people believe that there is only one right religion and they want to convert everyone who are not Christian. But the Muslim people in Bandung are very different from the other part of Java. They have a high degree of devoutness and also radicalism. So these people realize that, hey, although we do have the values, we do have the willingness to convert people, we just cannot do it. Because if we do it, we will get killed or we will get yelled at, etc. So emotional energy is something that can expand. They can contract, they can expand. And this is something that's quite also useful for organizations. So when organization tells their employees, oh, change your values, that hardly work, I think, according to my study, because it's pretty much constant. What they can do is try to manipulate the energy. So try to make them feel like they cannot do it. That's what they can do. But telling them to change their values, I don't think that's possible. Of course, future research needs to confirm that. Finding number 3, value misalignment and moral emotions give people the energy to challenge the status quo. This is exactly what happens with Mr. X. Mr. X feels that there is no alignment between his values and the values of the organization, and of course he felt angry, he felt guilty, and that gives him the energy to try to challenge the system in the church. However, last but not least, values and emotions are not all powerful because the energy that they generate can actually be contracted. So the end story for Mr. X told me that, hey, in the end, I did not protest, I did not do anything to change the system in the church because the leader is so powerful. I feared him, I respected him. So this is the reason why that power is one of the examples of one thing that can limit the energy of these people. Context also, like what happens in Bandung. So this is the end of my presentation. I would just like to say that I do not claim that I know everything. I have all the answers about emotions, about values. I only start to scratch the surface, but I do believe that if we want to move forward together and if we want to try to solve some of the grandest challenges on Earth, I believe that we need to start to have a more healthy and honest conversations about values and emotions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We now start the discussion. We have a committee with a number of people from universities elsewhere. So, well. We start the discussion with the discussion will be started by Professor Ray from the University of Alberta.
Thank you, Rector. Dear candidate, I want to first of all tell you that it was a pleasure to read your document, that forward some very interesting new concepts that I believe will be important in the future, and appreciate all the work that has gone into this preparation. The questions I would like to ask you are really related to the theoretical contributions that you see. And in particular, I wanted to ask you to provide us with a bit more background and explanation about your ideas on micro-foundations of institutions. And in Chapter 4 particularly, you suggest that your study of emotions and the way in which people express their emotions is an important piece of micro-foundations. So I'd like you to first of all tell me what do you mean by micro-foundations, and then how do you believe that the emotions you've uncovered and revealed are important to that field of study?
Dear highly learned opponent, thank you very much for your kind words and encouragement, and thank you for the important question about the theoretical implications for my study. Yes. Okay. So, micro-foundation. So, when we look at the history of institutional theory has been very much structural, talking always about, mostly in the past, talking about the macro structure and how this structure really shape human behaviors, organizational behaviors. But in the late 2000s, there were a lot of studies coming out on the micro foundations, on how actually the activities people on the ground, so it's not really top-down approach, but more bottom-up approach. So how we also have some kind of, I would not say the agency here, because it's a very tricky term to use, but at least we do have some activities that can also shape, so either create or change or disrupt the top level, the structure in this case. And I believe that when we look at the activities of this of human beings in general, like what I had before, in the past, institutional theory has focused a lot on rationality, or at least that's what I feel the taste is of institutional theory. But recently, in the last 5 years, people start to realize that actually there are also other ingredients of these activities, such as emotions, such as values. And you brought up the issue of emotions here and how it actually lead to to the how it can actually shape the organization. So throughout my work, I was actually talking a lot about the institutional work. So how all this work are representation of all kinds of activities that actors conduct in their daily lives. And this institutional work, one of the ingredients of it is actually emotions. So for instance, like the example of Mr. X here, when maybe I can show you this, model, the disrupting activities there is actually, the way I theorize emotions here is that emotions give you the power to do things, to move forward things through institutional work. And through institutional work, hopefully, of course, it's not shown here, but in other papers, there are some success stories on how institutional work can actually shape the institution at the institutional level. So I hope my answer is clear.
Yes, you are.
I could ask another follow-up question, please. You also bring power into the equation when you talk about the, and in your chapter, I felt that you are touching on power, touching on emotions, but could you explain how they go together, please?
Highly learned opponent, thank you for the question. Yes, so the thing that I would like to say first is this. The main theme of my dissertation is really about emotions and values. Power happened here pretty much when we look at this model, it happens quite sporadically because it didn't really flow into the phases. It just happened in phase 3 there. And the connection of this is that power, the way I see it, is one of the suppressor of emotion. So especially in this case, when power is used in that way. I'm not going to say it's the wrong way, but this is the power that is systemic, that is used to maintain and to reproduce the institution. In this case, the church money management, how they are obscure and extravagant and all that stuff. So in that case, power also in this case, at least from this model, I can say that power is used by these leaders to evoke fear and respect. So when we do have power, yes, we can make things happen by either evoking actors' emotions or perhaps also their rationality. But in this case, because my work is focused on their emotions, so yes, so this leaders really try to use the power to evoke fear and respect, and because of that, these people, including Mr. X, said that, okay, although I want to do some disrupting activities, some people did a little bit, they did not succeed. So I think that's how I see the connection between power and emotion in my paper. Thank you.
Then we proceed with our next guest from University.
Thank you, Rector. Dear candidate, let me start by reiterating what Professor Ray already said in terms of the compliments about your thesis. It's a very interesting topic. I particularly like the confessional feature of the dissertation. So let me ask you a question that ties in with your methodology specifically. In the dissertation itself and also in the presentation just now, you emphasized the importance of trust and diplomacy. particularly in building relationships with your informants. And yet you say very little about the moral challenges that are involved. And so my question is relatively straightforward, right? So what were some of the moral challenges that you had to work out, maybe around exploitation or betrayal, and how did you tackle these?
Dear highly learned opponent, thank you very much for your kind words and also for the moral question. Yes, where should I start here? When I was in the field, I only had one goal, really, and that goal is to find the truth. And that it was also very timely at a time because the biggest church in Indonesia was hit by a financial scandal. So I also acted in a way like a journalist at a time, trying to ask people from the media and also the members and everything. And actually I found, not found, but I want to highlight this this code of conduct actually on the scientific integrity course that I followed in that year actually, and it says here the choice of methods and criteria is guided solely by the goal of truth finding and not by external goals such as commercial success or political influence. And indeed that was my main concern in the beginning. But of course people can ask, okay, how far can you do this? And you mentioned about betrayal. I think I would like to say this. I don't think that I betray anyone in the field. However, I cannot also please everyone because, especially in chapter 4, this is the confession of some people in the church. Of course, within organization, there are different camps who support the leaders and camps who did not support the leader. So of course, when people who did not support the leader read this, they will be really happy. But people who supported the leader, I don't think that they will be pleased reading this truth, I think. But in a way, I don't see that that's betraying them. It could provoke some discomfort from their side, but I do not think that I betray them because in the very beginning, I was always straightforward. I said, I would love to understand how Pentecostalism work in Indonesia. I give them all the paperwork from school, all the signed paperwork, and I mentioned to them many times, it will be anonymous, even if you don't want, because I know that this is a very very sensitive subject. So yeah, I really made sure that I was really honest and straightforward from the very beginning. Yeah, I don't think that I really betray them by this. All what I mention here are really the truth from people. Even in chapter 4, you also see some of the quotes from people who actually supported the church. So when they see that, they see that, okay, that's true, that's what I said. But what I say here is that there are also another camp in the church that do not support these practices. So, well, do I betray them? I don't think so. Do I make them uncomfortable reading it? Perhaps yes, but what's not when it goes about something like this, when we read this new papers about the sexual harassment in the Catholic Church, it pretty much is also the same what I did here, try to expose the truth. Some people will be comfortable with it, some people will not be comfortable with it, I think. So that would be my answer.
Thank you. Then we turn to Dr. Bridou from University of Amsterdam.
Yeah. Thank you, Rector. So dear candidate, first congratulations on a very nice dissertation. It was good to read about emotions from ethnographic work. And to situate it for you, to situate my questions, I'm more used to read experiments about moral emotions and neuroscience work. So I'm coming from a different angle at it. And that might also explains my questions. So please, if the questions are not clear, ask me to elaborate further. My first question is about how you conceptualize emotions in your work. In particular, I was wondering at what level you see emotions, because you have participants describing their own emotions, it seems, so it seems at the individual level, but I also saw places where you talk about collective, and you seem to define emotions at the collective level. So are there at a specific level, at both levels in your work, and how do these levels relate to each other?
Very learned opponent, thank you very much for your kind words and for the questions on the concept of emotions. Yes, so actually, to tell you the truth, the first version of this paper was actually very OB and very psychological. And yes, I have some friends actually who are neurologists and biologists, and we had a lot of talk about this emotion stuff. And yes, I think what we as sociologists or organization theorists agree with with biologists is that when we see emotions, I think we both agree that it is nature and nurture at the same time. So emotions are, of course, when we look at the chemical and everything that happens in our brain, that is valid. But also we also learn to fear something. We learn to be ashamed of something. And without learning that, for instance, when someone doesn't know fear, for instance, in a particular social setting, when someone is not feeling ashamed of something, then there is no chemical or anything happen in the brain. So in that sense, I think I would say I acknowledge both the biological aspect of emotions and also the social aspect of it. And then when you ask about the question on the level of analysis, the level of analysis, I think I would say that yes, emotions, of course, it happens, it is experienced by people, but our focus is more on how it works in a higher level. So maybe I can say this first. When we look at works in OB and psychology, it's mostly about how can we regulate emotions, how can we produce emotional labor, for instance, for customer service, etc. So it is more intra-individual. It is more about how leaders can motivate. Sometimes it's intra-individual, sometimes it's dyadic, but it stops there. From our perspective as in sociology or in organization theory, it is more, okay, so what's the connection of this? So, okay, it happens per individual, but what will be the consequences? What will be the link towards society? So for instance, a Brexit. So of course, people do not decide on their vote only on their rationality, but also what they think is right? Their ideology, their values, but also their emotions, like they feel afraid that all these immigrants coming and taking their job. So although it is experienced at an individual level, it has consequences that shape organization or society at large. I think I would say it like that in this, for this question. Thank you.
Then we proceed with
Dear candidate, first of all, I really enjoy reading your thesis. It's really well written, it's interesting. It was a topic for me fascinating and to some extent, let's say, different from my daily research activity, and that's also why I like reading it a lot. I have a question related as well to the micro foundations. if you can go back to your previous slide, I think, to your previous slide, the last slide that you presented, yeah, and then the last one of the presentation. Yeah, this one. Very interesting. I read in the first point that you say that it's about the power to convert the abstract into the tangible. I studied theology years ago, and that's similar to a quote of St. Thomas, that it's functional to my question. He says that the faith is something that can, let's say, at the macro, we can say institutional level, changing the invisible into the visible. But he also says that the second part of the quote, that it's something that can also bring, let's say, the visible that the faith creates, changing the invisible in your heart. And so for him, it's a double mechanism, let's say. And that's related to my question. You look at one side, let's say, of the macro foundations, which is totally aligned, let's say, with your organization theory or, as you say, sociological perspective. So looking how values and emotions can help shaping or changing or modify or creating institutions. But there is a new trend in micro foundation, more in OB, looking at how some sort of broader level values can also change the individual himself, which is something also that you seem to some extent portraying in this very nice picture. There is not a crowd, there is a single person walking and to some extent changing. Because you talk of religion, so maybe there is a lot of conversion, you talk of micro foundation. Did you find any evidence of the reverse pattern, that these macro level, let's say, commitment into emotions or values can change the individuals to the process?
Very learned opponent, thank you very much for your kind words and for the reflective question. Yes, there is, perhaps maybe I should start with this. There is also a trend in the literature on emotions and institutions to start looking at emotions as something that is constitutive in the structural level, so really at the macro level. And yes, I did actually observe that a lot, but it's more with the members. And I think this would be very suitable for papers that's written for theological, journals or something like that. Because yes, I do believe how people, for instance, faith, for instance, is a very, very strong and very predominant in these churches. People pray late at night, really from 11 to 2 and sometimes from 4 to 7 a.m. So I was there too to observe how these people really did all this and for what really. I asked that myself. And so yes, I think there is also that effect, although I do not theorize that in my paper. I do not claim to theorize that, but yes, I do observe that in the field, that this faith as a macro level constitutive emotions of Pentecostalism, or perhaps also other Christian religions or all religions, really shape the way people behave. And yeah, I definitely saw that in my field. Yes, in the field.
Thanks. Yeah.
Good, then we proceed with Dr. Wijaya.
Thank you, Mr. Rector. Dear candidate, being the last in line has the advantage that I can just endorse the words of compliment of colleagues. It's a very salient topic. My question pertains to the role of emotions and values. So I fully concur with you that in institutional processes, the rational component is dominant, and that the role of values and emotions has been underplayed or not sufficiently understood. At the same time, while I read your findings, I also wonder whether we really need the role of values and emotions in your accounts. Especially when you speak to systemic power, I somehow felt that I could understand the outcome without invoking the role of values and emotions in these processes. And so as people came to accept, let's say, malpractices in Pentecostal church, they somehow felt, okay, we can't change this practice in any case. So all we can do is to accept them. So it felt more like cognitive dissonance reduction rather than having a proper role for emotions in shaping the institutional processes. So in other words, while I fully concur with the potential role of values and emotions in explaining institutional processes, I wonder to what extent you have really elaborated on and tapped into the proper role of these values and emotions as you explain the institutional outcomes.
Dear very learned opponent, thank you very much for your kind words again and for the question. Maybe I can show you this one again. Yes, you're absolutely right about bringing up the cognitive aspect. Actually, if we look at closely to this, there is some rationality here. So when these people change the location of the anchor of their emotional investment, this is actually a very cognitive exercise. But there are two different worlds, the real world and the world of writing in writing a paper. In writing a paper, we get a lot of noise from our reviewers and also our editors to really shape and direct how the paper should be in a way. And sometimes there is a limitation to really talk about a lot of stuff. So in this case, yes. So for instance, when in the fourth phase, when these people change, there is actually some cognitive going on there. I believe that. But I also want to defend that without the fear and respect from followers and from the followers to the leaders, I don't think that this institutional arrangements can be sustained in this way. So in this way, of course, my paper is not trying to say what to do for policymakers, for organization. This is more about how to understand the real world out there, how something is sustained or something is changed. So in this case, is how some wrongdoing is sustained. So I think that without fear and I think with fear, without fear, I think these people can do a lot, but because they fear and respect the leaders at the same time, they stop doing the disrupting activities. So they want to protest, they want to change small things in the church. And that's the reason why I think we see a lot in the world that a lot of people have a lot of passion, a lot of values. They want to do good things in life, but then we see that, oh, it's actually not easy, and then we just give up. And that's the reason why I believe, that's the reason why I put it in one of my propositions that if we are reflexive and less fearful, I think the world will be a better place. Maybe it's a bit overstretched, but I truly believe that if we are not afraid to challenge people to do things, because I think fear is a very, very powerful, I would not say toxic, but I think it's a very powerful emotion where we fear, we cannot think, we cannot talk, we cannot do things. And I think because of that, I think what I really want to show here is that that because this followers really feared and respected this leader so much that they felt helpless in a way. So I think that would be my answer.
Thank you. Well, we have some time left, so we return to
Thank you, Rector. Dear candidate, in chapter 5 of your of your dissertation. This is also concepts that you were mentioning in your opening comments about this interesting idea you have on elasticity of emotions. And what I would like to ask you, you mentioned that the role of context may be very important in understanding elasticity, how it happens, how it may be part of stretching and sometimes part of shrinking. And you also mentioned the idea of paradoxical emotions important in understanding elasticity. So I would like to ask you to please explain further how that can be. How did your data allow you to tell us more about, how did your data allow you to put forward this concept of elasticity, and how did you get more information about context?
Highly learned opponent, thank you very much for the question. Yes, so in a way, chapter 5 is like the prelude to chapter 4, actually, because it's more theoretical, it is more fundamental. So when we're talking about the emotional energy, I was actually still thinking, should I call it emotional, or can we just call it energy? Because in a way, this one, like the first one, for instance, I could also call it normative energy, because when I look at the paper from Collins, he didn't actually mention what type of emotions involved. He just used the word emotional energy. But I try to be more critical about the work, and I really question myself, is there anything emotional about the emotional energy that he talked about? So that's first thing to say. And when we look at the sources of this energy, I would just call it energy at this time, the first one that I see is really the values. So when I first code, I did not use the word energy. The first one that I used was ability, because these people say, oh, I can do this or I cannot do that. So, and then I came across the paper from Van and Sietsma, from AMJ, and then, oh, there is this emotional energy. Of course, we are told to belong to a certain theoretical home and just be consistent with the concept. So, okay, let's just use this concept, the emotional energy. So what I actually saw two sources of this energy. The first one is actually the values. The second one is distinct emotion. So when these people felt excitement, that excitement in a way, of course, I do not see it in the data, but they say it, you know, oh, I feel more energized. This is some of the examples, direct quotes from these people. They say that, oh, I feel more energized. I feel more able now. And they say it after they felt the emotion of excitement. Or some people say, oh, I really fear the fact that I have to evangelize in Bandung, for instance, because what about if we evangelize to the wrong people? If we evangelize radical Muslim or a potential terrorist, for instance, we can get killed. So I fear that. And that's why, they said, that's why I don't think that I can evangelize. So the way I theorize this is that emotions, in a way, is also a distinct emotion, either positive or negative in their valence. Can also lead to the contraction or the expansion of energy. But for values, mostly it is the expansion. It creates the energy pretty much. That's at least how the data says about the elasticity and about how the energy, where the energy comes from. And I would say it's from the values and from the distinct emotions.
Thank you, Rector, dear candidate. It seems that religion in general, and Pentecostalism in particular, is a deeply embodied experience. Right? I spent some time, or some years, in a theological seminary, albeit not to study theology. But most people would probably agree, with a statement that religion is generally deeply embodied. And yet the body doesn't really show up anywhere in your thesis, except, of course, implicitly through emotion and through the energy you spoke about. So my question is this, and it's a somewhat speculative question, but I wondered, based upon your experience in the field, to what extent do you think the body might be implicated in the process of the reproduction of institutions, other than just emotion?
Highly learned opponent, thank you for the question. Did you say body?
Body, the physical body.
The physical body.
Yeah, to what extent do institutions inscribe themselves into the body, and to what extent is the body implicated in the reproductive process itself?
Well, okay. Honestly, I did not observe that. What I did observe when I was there, and in all this highly, they call it highly spiritual surfaces, some people like tremble, some people cry. This is from the member side. Of course, there were some employees also. When I went to this exorcism or the deliverance services, I also saw people like banging themselves on the floor. But I think that's only but the experience of being a member in the church. But I do not really observe the role of body, of physical body, for the reproduction, I think, because I think I know that in your work, you know, in the war zone, it's I think perhaps you can see that all this when people are really tense and everything, and perhaps in my work, I only observe it purely in the on the ground level and then during the services, but I did not theorize anything about that, and I'm afraid I cannot say further about the concept of body in this case.
To you. Thank you. Well, it appears that there's work to do then. If
Yes.
you don't have, so
Yes, Sir Rector.
good to hear that. Okay, Dr. Brido.
Yes, dear candidate. I didn't find the word group identity in your dissertation, so I have a question about identity and group identity. Yeah, it seems it could be relevant, especially in the last essay where you have an in-group and an out-group, with the out-group being the Muslims community around. And in the literature in social psychology, it suggests that people can feel emotions on behalf of their group. And it resonates with me when you were talking about fear. So did you find some evidence of identity being relevant in your data? And if so, why did you decide not to include it? I mean, I know values and identity are relatively related, so maybe that's...
Very learned opponent, thank you very much for the question. Yes, actually, one of the many previous iterations of this paper was about identity and about collective identity. We don't use the word group, I think, group identity, but more collective identity. But in this case, more about, because these churches are really operating like businesses. So one of the things that these churches was afraid that I would leak information to other churches. So so they really think like they are really like businesses pretty much. And yes, in the field, I really see that these Pentecostal churches really work together at a higher level, so they don't talk to each other, but they went to association and like a group and say that, you know, this is the best type of a denomination, and in a way that makes it stronger against other. So yes, I do see some out-group, but in this case not the Islam and the Christianity, but more Pentecostal and non-Pentecostal, because they said, yeah, we need a strategy to get more members. And we don't care if the other members are from other denominations, if it's from Baptist church or from Mormon or from whatever, we don't care. And that's the reason why they are really active in the association, to build the identity that this is the church if you want to get rich. This is the church when you give $10 and you will get $1,000 more. And so yeah, that's the kind of message, the kind of collective identity that they portray to the other rival church. But in terms of the Islam and this, perhaps if I had more time and I could really talk with some Muslims face to face, formal interviews, I think I would do that. But for now, it's because this is only the perception from this Pentecostalists. So I do not dare to say that the in-group, out-group, because, or even value clash. I did not want to do that because maybe the value are not clashing. I don't know, because I really have to get the perspective from the Muslim too. In this case, everything what's written in the paper are really the perspective from the Pentecostal people. And of course, I informally talk with some Muslim in that city to confirm if that's right, but I did not really systematically and thoroughly talk with these people. Can you tell me about your teaching? So pretty much, I don't know much about Islam, for instance. Even about Pentecostalism now, I kind of forget already what it is. But anyway, so that would be my question, my answer. Yeah.
Okay, I noted at least a second topic for research, so that's good. Dr. Tassel.
Dear candidate, we have a question. The generalizability, let's say, in other organizational context. What's really interesting, I think, if you look at many organizational contexts, they have features of these religious organizations, charismatic leadership in which the leader itself is honored like some sort of religious messiah or some sort of fidelistic attachment to the organization. What can be some more reasoning about the generalizability of your funding, let's say, in other organizational context?
Yes, fair learned opponent, thank you for the question. Yes, I have thought a lot about the generalizability. And of course, while a lot of organizations out there do not have this or do not share these characteristics, I agree with you that a few actually have actually share this characteristic. So I think the question is more about is it really effective to have this? Like for instance, when we look at Apple, I have a friend actually working there, and he told me that it's like at the time with the Steve Jobs, he's someone who's feared by a lot of people, and indeed, and also respected. So in a way, it's pretty much the same. The mechanism, it happens the same. But I guess finding that kind of leader is very difficult, I think. It's very rare to find leaders like that. So, so yeah, I think for most organizations who do not share this characteristics and want to have this kind of characteristics, especially I believe that when we can evoke fear and respect at the same time, I think that person is very powerful, if not the most powerful. But I guess the question is it really effective for organization? Perhaps if they want to reproduce the institutions, perhaps it is, because it works for these churches. And yeah, but I think that would be my answer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, then Dr. Wijaya, you perhaps have a question or?
Sure. So, dear candidate, I would like to explore the interrelation between emotions and values. So how do they relate to one another? I understand you have done ethnographic work and you come up with a process model. So it may be a bit inappropriate to invoke the language of a variance model. Yet could it be that values are somehow the driver and that emotions are more a moderator? Or do you see their roles still different way?
Okay. very learned opponent, thank you for the question. Being values as the driver, you said. I think it could, but I think we can also think that, for instance, I think there will be some instances where emotions can drive values. I think this is the way I would answer it. I think I don't know where values come from. And after pondering about it, actually, I was thinking about it for weeks, and I have it here in my notes. I think we also need to know more where values come from. Like why, for instance, I believe in justice, like from very young age. So is it really biological or not? I don't know. And
Thank you. Well, that's a third topic for further research, I guess. Anyway, the time allowed for the defense of your thesis is over. The committee will now withdraw to deliberate. Would you please wait here until we return, and I adjourn the meeting.
like, yeah. Ik ga...
Jij staat eerst en dan
Aha.
neem
Insap. Oké. Oké, ja. Oké, ja, duidelijk. Oké, ik breng het niet.
relax.
Oké,
Je hebt verder geen zorgen meer.
oké, ja. Oké, oké. Hallo.
Ja hoor.
Wat? Dat is goed. Ja, daar gaan we. Doen we die ook? Apa menurut Bapak? Nggak ngerti Bapak tadi ngomong. He doesn't understand anything.
Muslim gitu tak.
Yeah, Muslim, of course, yeah, yeah.
But I think I could answer everything.
Yeah,
I
I
was,
think so, yeah, I think so. It's right.
in the beginning, I was so nervous.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it took me so long to answer.
But
I was so
I
nervous the
could hear
first
that you
one.
were enthusiastic more about some questions and not about the other questions.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think
make
I'm
it so
okay
short.
with no, but the question from Frank, it's I understood it and I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
thinking about it.
That was clear, that he's from the same university.
I,
You didn't talk over it.
I don't know where values come from, you know. And
Yeah.
I said to him, I felt I believe in
Yeah,
justice
yeah,
already
yeah,
went
yeah,
for
yeah.
young age, and where do I learn that, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
That was a good answer, I think.
But is there an occasion where emotions lead to values?
I don't dare to say.
I don't know. Yeah. So, but
I think building values is much more. Right.
balik nanti kita di sana. Nanti kita ke sana terus dikasih diploma nih.
Oh.
Ya ampun, that's it. One more. Nggak masuk lagi. Masuk
So-
lagi
So
duduk.
you go for your second title?
Ini sementara.
No, bla bla. Pokoknya suruh nunggu gitu lah. Terus nggak mungkin nggak anu kok, nggak mungkin nggak lulus. Pasti lulus, cuman tekan here. Open this. For now. Is he going to be or not? Or only here?
Ask him.
Doctoral.
Mana ini lah? Mana?
SMA?
Ini mamamu. Ini lah, meja ni meja ni sidang ini lah. Meja ni sidang. Iya, nak meja ni sidang. Ada tulisannya meja ni sidang. Antara emosi
Insane,
dan
insane.
ya,
Already.
Here?
I reopen. Mr. Candidate, the Doctoral Board of Erasmus University Rotterdam, represented by me, has considered your thesis. Having heard your deep advice of this committee, I grant you the title of Doctor. I authorize Professor Huygens to bestow this degree upon you in the customary way.
It is with great pleasure that I undertake the task the Rector Magnificus has allotted me. By the authority invested by law, and according to the decision of the Doctorate Board of this university, I hereby confer upon you, Hendra Raharja Wijaya, the doctorate degree. As a testimony and proof hereof, I present you the diploma, signed by the Rector Magnificus, the promoters, and the other members of the committee, and endorsed with the seal of the university. Having performed this task, may I take the opportunity to be the first to address you as a doctor and to congratulate you on your achievement. Dear Hendra, I cannot begin to tell you how happy I am for you that this joyous day has finally come. I'm also glad that you are supported by two men who have played such important roles in your life, your father and your longtime support, Rini. It's great to see you both here. Moreover, it's also nice to see the rest of your family here, especially your mother. And it is testing to see how, or it's telling to see how strong the family bonds are, that they have been willing to follow you to the ends of the earth to celebrate these activities and festivities with you here. Finally, I'm also very happy that your new love could be here today, Hendra. Before we turn to more personal words, let me also briefly pause to thank the two international members of your committee, Mark de Rond and Trish Ray, for taking time out of their busy schedules to come and join us for your defense. And let me also explicitly thank Trish for her tremendous hospitality during two extended stays at the University of Alberta, where you made new friends, where you learned to sharpen your ideas, and where you also gained a couple of new co-authors. Trish and Mike Lounsbury and Royston Greenwood also gave you a good brainwash while you were there. Before the first 3 months after you got back, you mumbled, "But what's the theoretical contribution here?" after every second sentence you spoke, Hendra. But it all turned out well in the end. The PhD has really been a coming of age project for you on many fronts. When I first met you, you were a shy and modest MPhil student who was still finding his bearings in Dutch society and who was still very much in search of a scholarly identity. Now, some 7 odd years later, you stand here as a much more confident person who knows who he is as a researcher and with very clear and exciting research interests. Also, while it is a bit of a pity that Dutch ranks pretty much very high amongst the world's most useless languages, since 99.6% of the world population doesn't speak a word of it, it speaks volumes about you that you learned to speak Dutch fluently and went through the kind of obligatory Dutch acculturation and naturalization process very expediently. And this is more than a throwaway comment, because I think that these are the kinds of skills that are obviously important for any aspiring ethnographer, right, to develop that degree of contextual sensibility. Now, for me personally, the perfect acid test for a successful PhD trajectory, and that is somewhat selfish, I'll admit that, is also the question whether I learned something as a supervisor from the candidate. And I must admit, Hendra, that I in fact learned an awful lot from you. And let me just highlight 3 things. The first is that what I really learned in my dealings with you is that the PhD project is all about the candidate and not about the supervisor. Right? In many PhD trajectories, it is easy to try and see whether you can bend the PhD's interest into your own research agenda as a supervisor. And with you in that spirit, you started your career, and you probably remember this in your nightmares, with an MPhil thesis by doing an admirable meta-analysis. But whereas you did the job really well, and I can honestly say that, your heart clearly wasn't in it. And what I learned from you was that each PhD trajectory needs to start with the question, what do you want to do? And this is not a magic formula, because I still remember that it took you a couple of months to answer this question. And it also took perhaps some arm wrestling or some convincing on my part that it is perfectly fine to write a business school PhD thesis on Pentecostal churches. But after yours, I will never start any PhD trajectory again without asking the question, but what is it that you want to do, more or less as the opening question, right? So following your passion and interest has brought you quite a bit, Hendra, and I'm glad that you did all the while. Second thing, and this is also very selfish, but I learned a lot about doing qualitative research by engaging in this process with you. Admittedly, I've done some qualitative research myself, and a few of my other students, such as Michel and Jochem and Ruxie and Katrien, have written perfectly fine mixed method studies. But you were the first student that I ever supervised who went all in and did a fully qualitative study and an ethnography on top of that. And I'm not sure how vivid your memory is of all of this, but we used to Skype quite a bit while you were away on Java, and in between your trips to the field, we talked a lot about research design questions, about which churches to target, which ones to avoid, how to get access to them, if necessary through the proverbial back door if the front door was firmly locked. I certainly cherish all of those experiences and making those decisions with you, or at least serving as your sounding board while you were making them. And I certainly have become a more complete researcher by working with you, and again, Hendra, I can do nothing but thank you for it. The third thing I learned quite a bit about is about the role of resilience in a PhD trajectory, because your trajectory really wasn't easy, right? You had to switch between both methods and topics, between your MPhil and your PhD thesis, but you managed. You had to earn your respondents' trust, negotiate access, indeed show them the paperwork, and talk to your own personal values about what you were doing with these people. But you succeeded in the end, I think. You had to go through 5 painstaking rounds of reviews for your first publication, but you did not budge. And because qualitative research can be time-consuming, you had to teach your way to pay for several PhD extensions, but you did not wink once again. And every PhD trajectory can be retold from a variety of perspectives, but your persistence and tenacity have earned you my deepest respect. I fully expect also that this resilience will carry you through no matter whatever it is that you go through next, Hendra. So on that note, so where you will go, it is time for me to let go, dear Hendra. I hope that we will remain friends and that we will remain co-authors, but it is time for you to spread your wings. And on that note, one tradition here in Rotterdam is that we give our students a little gift. which supposedly symbolizes the winged mind of Erasmus. So the statue that I'm going to give you right now is the Ingenium Alatum. Let me present that to you in the spirit of friendship and in the hope that you will continue to cherish your bonds with the community of alumni of the Research School Erin. So on that note, Hendra. You have 2 hands and 2 gifts, so this more or less finishes it. Let me just say that as you move forward in life onto a new, bright future, let me wish you nothing but the best, Hendra. Almanis.
Dr. Wijaya, I have the pleasure also on behalf of the doctorate part of the university congratulate you having up. I now formally declare this meeting closed.